The freezing ocean water filled my lungs as I watched my fiancé wrap his life jacket around another woman. I died listening to him whisper, "I have to protect our baby." The twist? She was never pregnant. When I opened my eyes 3 hours earlier, I made sure they both went down with the ship. The first thing I felt was the agonizing phantom burn of salt water in my lungs. I shot up in bed, gasping violently, my hands clawing at my own throat as if trying to rip the ocean out of my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I wasn't drowning in the pitch-black, freezing waters of the Mediterranean. I was sitting on a plush, king-sized mattress, surrounded by the warm, amber glow of the master stateroom aboard the Oceanic Pearl, Derek's 70-foot luxury yacht. I threw off the silk sheets, my body trembling so violently that my knees buckled when my feet hit the mahogany floorboards. I dragged myself to the vanity mirror. Staring back at me was a woman who hadn't yet been betrayed, abandoned, and left to die. My skin was flushed and warm, my lips a healthy pink instead of the oxygen-deprived blue that had been etched into my final memory. My eyes darted to the digital clock on the nightstand. 9:15 p.m. September 14th. A breathless sob escaped my lips. I had died. I remembered the exact sensation of my core temperature plummeting, the horrific sound of the yacht's hull tearing open on the submerged reef, and the screams of the passengers. Most of all, I remembered Derek. Derek Harrison, the man I had loved for 6 years, the man who was supposed to marry me in 3 weeks. When the evacuation alarm had sounded in my past life, we had rushed to the deck. There had been 2 lifeboats, the primary motorized tender Alpha and the secondary inflatable raft Bravo. I had reached Alpha first, my hands gripping the fiberglass edge, waiting for Derek, but he hadn't reached for my hand. Instead, his fingers had locked into the fabric of my life jacket, and he had violently shoved me backward onto the rain-slicked deck. I had slipped, fracturing my wrist, watching in stunned horror as he tenderly guided Madison, his junior VP of marketing, into the safest boat. "I'm sorry, Natalie," he had screamed over the howling wind, his face a mask of faux heroic agony. "Madison is 3 months pregnant. She has a severe anemic condition. I have to protect our child." The crew had forced me onto Bravo, but Bravo's winch had been damaged in the initial collision. Halfway down, the cables snapped. We were plunged into the churning, icy abyss. I drowned watching Derek's boat safely navigate away, his arms wrapped protectively around the woman who had been sleeping with him in my bed. I pressed my palms against the cold glass of the vanity mirror, the phantom chill of the water receding, replaced by a white-hot, blinding rage. Madison wasn't pregnant. I knew this with absolute certainty because, in my previous life, just before the boat had gone down, I had walked past Madison's guest cabin and seen an empty bottle of Belvedere vodka and a discarded blister pack of birth control pills on her nightstand. Pregnant women with severe anemia don't down half a bottle of vodka and take daily contraceptives. It was a calculated, filthy lie designed to force Derek's hand to make him choose her publicly when disaster struck, knowing his wealthy, image-obsessed family would demand he take responsibility for his heir. I looked at the clock again. 9:22 p.m. The Oceanic Pearl would strike the jagged, uncharted reef off the coast of Corsica at exactly 9:48 p.m. I had 26 minutes. I didn't panic. The desperation that had defined my last moments was gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute calm. I moved with surgical precision. I dressed in warm, functional layers, thick cashmere leggings, a merino wool turtleneck, and rubber-soled boots. I grabbed my waterproof dry bag from the closet. Inside, I packed my passport, my wallet, and the 3 stacks of emergency euros Derek kept in the wall safe. Then I paused. If I was going to survive, I needed to make sure Derek's life was utterly destroyed when we reached the mainland. I opened Derek's leather briefcase on the desk. I pulled out the encrypted hard drive I knew contained the illegal offshore tax evasions for Harrison Global Tech. I dropped it into my bag. At 9:35 p.m., I stepped out of the stateroom and walked down the softly illuminated corridor. The yacht was quiet. Most of the guests were on the upper deck, enjoying the champagne mixer. As I approached the starboard aft deck, I heard a familiar, sickeningly sweet voice drifting from the shadows of the lifeboat housing. "I'm telling you, Mom, it's fine," Madison was saying, her voice hushed but impatient. I pressed myself against the fiberglass bulkhead, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "Yes, the ultrasound is fake," Madison hissed into her phone. "I paid a tech at a clinic in Miami $500 to print it with my name on it. Derek is an idiot. He's so terrified of his father cutting him off if there's a public scandal that he's already promised to break off the engagement with Natalie. As soon as the ring is on my finger, I'll just tell him I miscarried. No, the anemia thing is just so he treats me like glass. I have him wrapped around my finger." A cruel smile touched my lips. I stopped the recording and backed away silently. The evidence was secured. I made my way to the upper deck. The ocean air was beginning to turn sharp and bitter. The wind was picking up, churning the black water into whitecaps. Through the glass doors of the main lounge, I saw Derek. He was holding a crystal flute of champagne, laughing handsomely at a joke one of his investors had made. He looked perfect. The perfect fiancé. The perfect sociopath. Dokus, kürke de peme. I walked past the lounge, heading straight for the port side of the vessel. In my previous life, everyone had rushed starboard toward Alpha, the luxury motorized lifeboat. What none of them knew, what I only found out as I was drowning, was that Alpha's motorized exhaust was faulty. Once deployed in the storm, it would flood the enclosed cabin with carbon monoxide, and its engine would die within 20 minutes, leaving it helplessly adrift in the freezing current for 8 hours before rescue. Bravo, the open-air inflatable on the port side, was the one that suffered the snapped winch, but I knew exactly why it snapped. The falling debris from the radar tower had struck the crane. If Bravo was deployed manually, just 10 feet further down the rail, it would drop perfectly. I reached Bravo. 2 deckhands, Liam and a younger kid whose name I didn't know, were taking a smoke break nearby. Before I could speak, a horrifying metallic screech tore through the night. The Oceanic Pearl violently shuddered, the deck tilting upward at a sickening 30-degree angle. The sound of tearing steel was deafening. Inside the lounge, glass shattered, and the screams began. The lights flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the eerie red glow of the emergency sirens. It was happening, again. But this time, I was ready. "Mayday, mayday! All passengers to the muster stations." Captain Mitchell's voice boomed over the crackling PA system, barely audible over the roaring wind and the grinding of the ship's hull against the reef. Chaos erupted on the upper deck. Women in evening gowns were slipping on the wet teakwood. Investors were shoving past each other in a blind panic. "Miss, we need to get you to the starboard side. The main tender is over there." Liam, the deckhand, yelled at me, grabbing my elbow. I yanked my arm away, my eyes locked on the heavy rubber housing of Bravo. No. The radar tower is going to collapse on this deck in exactly 2 minutes. We need to deploy Bravo right now, manually, from the lower cleat. Liam stared at me like I was insane, but my voice carried an absolute, terrifying authority. "Do it, now!" I screamed, pulling the release pin on the housing myself. The younger deckhand snapped out of his shock and rushed to help me. As we were unspooling the cables, a frantic voice cut through the darkness. "Natalie?" I turned. Derek was fighting his way through the crowd, dragging Madison by the wrist. Madison was hyperventilating, crying hysterically, clutching her flat stomach. They stumbled toward me. "Natalie, thank God," Derek yelled, reaching out to grab me. "The main boat is completely packed. They're fighting like animals over there. We have to take this one." I looked at his outstretched hand. In my past life, that hand had thrown me to my death. A wave of pure disgust washed over me. I stepped back, leaning against the sturdy rubber of Bravo, which the crewman had now swung out over the dark water. "You're not getting on this boat, Derek," I said. My voice wasn't raised, but it sliced through the panic like a blade. Derek blinked, the rain plastering his expensive hair to his forehead. "What? Nat, stop being crazy. The ship is sinking. Get in." "Alpha is over there." I pointed toward the starboard side, where the luxury tender was being boarded by a panicked mob. "You should go. Madison needs priority, doesn't she?" Derek froze. His eyes darted nervously to Madison, who was sobbing loudly, putting on the performance of a lifetime. Natalie, listen to me. I know this is a bad time to tell you this, but Madison is pregnant. She's carrying my child, and she has a fragile heart condition. You have to let us on first. I have to protect my family. It was the exact same speech, word for word, the same twisted, heroic justification he had used to condemn me to the freezing water. I know she's pregnant, Derek, I said, a slow, venomous smile spreading across my face. He stared at me, dumbfounded. You know? I also know you've been sleeping with her since January, I continued, my voice echoing over the wind. I know about the weekends in Aspen. I know about the late nights at the office. Nat, please, we can talk about this later. We are going to die. Derek screamed, stepping forward, his mask slipping to reveal the cowardly, terrified boy beneath. No, we aren't, I said. I stepped onto Bravo. Liam and the younger deckhand jumped in beside me. Wait, Madison shrieked, pushing past Derek, her fake fragility vanishing instantly. You can't leave us. You selfish bitch. I'm pregnant. Are you? I asked coldly. I pulled my phone from my waterproof bag, tapped the screen, and held it up. The volume was maxed out. Through the storm, Madison's own voice played clearly. Yes, the ultrasound is fake. Derek is an idiot. The anemia thing is just so he treats me like glass. The recording cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Madison's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Derek turned his head slowly, looking at Madison as if she had just morphed into a monster. What did that say? He whispered, his voice cracking. Madison, did you fake the ultrasound? Derek, no, it's an AI. She faked it to ruin us. Madison lied frantically, clawing at his jacket. My baby, our baby. Lower the boat, I told Liam. Natalie, wait, don't leave me with her, Derek screamed, suddenly lunging for the railing. The realization was crashing over him, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the sheer absurdity of the lie he had been willing to kill me for. Nat, I love you. She tricked me. Have a nice life, Derek, I said, my eyes dead, devoid of a single ounce of pity. Try not to choke on the exhaust. Liam released the manual brake. Bravo plummeted gracefully down the side of the hull, dropping smoothly into the churning, icy water below. We detached the cables just as a deafening crack echoed above us. I looked up to see the heavy steel radar tower snap and crash onto the exact spot we had been standing seconds before. Had we waited for the electric winch, we would have been crushed. We rode hard, moving away from the suction of the sinking oceanic pearl. 50 yards away, I saw Alpha, the enclosed luxury tender, violently hit the water on the starboard side. I saw Derek and Madison pinned inside the fiberglass canopy with 20 other screaming passengers. I settled back against the rubber raft, wrapping a thermal blanket around my shoulders. The storm was brutal, the waves tossing our small boat, but I wasn't afraid. I knew exactly what was coming. 45 minutes later, the blinding spotlight of the Coast Guard cutter Resolute swept over the dark water and locked onto our bright orange raft. We were pulled from the freezing sea, handed hot coffee, and wrapped in heated blankets. I stood on the warm, stable steel deck of the rescue ship, looking out into the night. I knew Alpha was still out there, and I knew that right now, in the freezing, toxic, claustrophobic cabin of that drifting boat, Derek was staring at the woman he had thrown my life away for, realizing she was nothing but a manipulative, lying fraud. Miss? A Coast Guard officer gently touched my shoulder. Are you all right? You're staring out into the dark. We're scanning for the other lifeboat now. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the glorious, burning heat travel down my throat, replacing the ghost of the ocean water that had killed me once before. I'm fine, officer, I said, a small, satisfied smile touching my lips as I leaned against the railing. Take your time. I want to watch them pull the rest of the garbage out of the sea. The Mediterranean night dragged on, cold and merciless, but I felt nothing but an intoxicating, brilliant warmth. While I sat wrapped in a heavy heated fleece blanket in the brightly lit galley of the Coast Guard cutter Resolute, sipping my third cup of scalding black coffee, the ship's radio crackled with frantic, chaotic updates. The brutal storm had scattered the shattered wreckage of the oceanic pearl across a massive 3-mile radius of churning black water. It took the rescue teams 8 agonizing hours to finally locate Alpha. By the time the early morning sun began to creep over the jagged horizon, painting the turbulent, unforgiving sea in bruised shades of deep purple and gold, the Coast Guard rescue chopper finally spotted the luxury tender. It was drifting helplessly 30 miles off the rocky coast of Corsica, violently tossed by the fading swells. When the massive steel hull of the Resolute pulled alongside the motorized raft, I walked out onto the starboard observation deck, leaning against the cold railing to watch the spectacle unfold. The scene below me was an absolute masterpiece of poetic justice. Alpha's state-of-the-art fiberglass canopy, specifically designed to shield its wealthy VIP occupants from the harsh oceanic elements, had tragically become a floating gas chamber. Just as I remembered from the horrific final moments of my past life, the lifeboat's faulty motorized exhaust system had vented directly into the completely sealed cabin. As the heavily geared Coast Guard crew forcefully pried the jammed pneumatic doors open with crowbars, a thick, nauseating cloud of concentrated carbon monoxide and stale, putrid air billowed out into the morning breeze. The 20 frantic passengers trapped inside were violently ill, covered in their own sickness, desperately gasping for fresh, clean oxygen. The paramedics had to physically drag the semi-conscious bodies onto the main deck of the Resolute, administering emergency oxygen to the worst cases. And then, through the crowd of frantic medics, I finally saw them. Derek was unceremoniously hauled over the steel railing by 2 burly, unsmiling sailors. He looked utterly and entirely destroyed. His custom, wildly expensive tuxedo jacket was completely ruined, stained, and reeking of exhaust fumes. His once perfect skin was a ghastly pale shade of green, his eyes bloodshot and terrifyingly unfocused from the toxic gas. He collapsed heavily onto the cold steel deck, violently coughing, shivering so intensely that his teeth audibly chattered over the roar of the ship's engines. Seconds later, Madison was dragged up the ramp directly behind him. Her pristine designer evening gown was torn at the seams, her carefully applied makeup smeared into grotesque raccoon-like circles down her pale cheeks. But the most striking detail of their miserable rescue wasn't their severe physical deterioration, it was the palpable radioactive hatred radiating violently between them. In the cramped, suffocating darkness of that drifting cabin, faced with the terrifying reality of a slow, agonizing death by asphyxiation, the ugly truth had violently clawed its way out. I walked slowly over to the medical triage area, my thick rubber boots clicking softly and rhythmically against the wet steel deck. I stood directly over Derek, allowing my shadow to fall heavily across his shivering, pathetic form. He blinked up at me, his red-rimmed eyes widening in absolute, staggering disbelief. I looked immaculate, dry, warm, perfectly composed, and completely unharmed. The stark, undeniable contrast between my pristine survival and his miserable suffering was a physical, devastating blow to his already shattered ego. "Natalie," he croaked, his voice incredibly raw and raspy from inhaling hours of deadly exhaust fumes. He reached a trembling, disgustingly pale hand toward the toe of my rubber boot. You're safe." "I am," I replied, my tone as incredibly calm and unbothered as a frozen, still lake. Bravo worked absolutely perfectly. It's truly amazing what happens when you don't blindly follow a cowardly, lying traitor into a mechanical death trap. Madison let out a ragged, utterly hysterical sob from the medical cot situated directly next to him. She glared at Derek with pure, unadulterated vitriol. He violently pushed an elderly woman out of the way just to get me a seat on that boat, she screamed, her voice cracking in wild desperation. And then, when the motor died and the cabin filled with poisonous gas, he actually tried to use my emergency oxygen mask. He tried to rip the plastic right off my face. "Natalie," I arched a perfectly manicured eyebrow, looking down at Derek with intense disgust. "Is that actually true? You aggressively tried to steal crucial oxygen from the fragile mother of your unborn child?" Derek squeezed his bloodshot eyes shut, a pathetic, high-pitched whimper escaping his throat. "She lied," he yelled, his voice breaking into a miserable squeak. "She lied about the baby. We thought we were dying in that dark box." The fumes were so incredibly thick. She confessed everything. She just wanted the Harrison Family Trust Fund. She's a manipulative monster. And exactly what does that make you, Derek? I asked softly, deliberately crouching down so I was perfectly eye level with his tear-streaked, pathetic face. You were completely willing to leave me to drown in the freezing ocean. You threw me to the wolves for a pathetic fantasy. You violently broke our 6-year engagement for a cheap, calculating scam. I was just so confused, he pleaded, desperately trying to grab my warm hand. I immediately pulled away as if he were highly contagious. Nat, please, you have to listen. We can fix this mess. I still love you. My powerful family. My father will make this whole thing right. We'll get married in the spring. I'll fire her immediately. Just please, I desperately need you. I really don't think your father is going to be worried about a spring wedding, Derek, I whispered maliciously, leaning in incredibly close so only he could hear me. I think he's going to be far more worried about the federal indictment. Derek's bloodshot eyes snapped wide open in sheer panic. What are you talking about? I confidently patted the heavy, waterproof dry bag slung securely over my left shoulder. I boldly took the liberty of grabbing your heavily encrypted hard drive from the master stateroom safe right before the ship went down. You know, the specific drive containing the massive offshore tax evasion records, the illegal shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the massive undocumented bribes paid to secure the Tokyo tech contract. All the color that had just miraculously started to return to his miserable face instantly drained away. He looked exactly like a rotting corpse. Natalie, no, he gasped, hyperventilating wildly. You didn't do that. You don't even know the master password. I know your master password is the exact date we got engaged in Paris, I said with a twisted, incredibly satisfied smile. Or at least it definitely was. Don't worry, Derek. I've already made a few very important phone calls from Captain Mitchell's encrypted satellite phone. I stood back up, towering over his broken, shaking form. Enjoy the mainland. When the towering steel hull of the rescue ship finally docked at the bustling, wildly chaotic port of Marseille, the entire concrete pier was swarming with aggressive international press. The horrific, sudden sinking of the luxury yacht had instantly made massive global headlines overnight. However, it was definitely not merely local maritime authorities waiting for our arrival on the wet docks. Waiting patiently at the exact bottom of the steep metal gangway was a highly coordinated, serious federal task force. I had brilliantly spent the last 2 grueling hours on the captain's encrypted satellite phone with the United States consulate, ensuring that Special Agent Bradley Miller from the elite corporate fraud division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was fully briefed. Agent Miller had been quietly investigating Harrison Global Tech for over a year and had taken the fastest train down from Paris to meet us. As Derek was forcefully escorted down the slippery ramp, shivering violently under a cheap silver emergency blanket, Agent Miller confidently stepped forward. He was a tall, incredibly serious man, wearing a sharp navy suit that contrasted deeply with the messy, chaotic maritime environment. Derek Harrison? Agent Miller asked firmly, quickly flashing a solid gold federal badge. I am Special Agent Bradley Miller. We are officially working in conjunction with international authorities and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You are immediately being detained pending formal extradition to the United States on multiple severe charges of massive corporate fraud, international wire fraud, and aggressive tax evasion. Derek's weak knees instantly buckled beneath him. If the brave deckhand had not firmly been holding his right arm, he would have violently collapsed onto the hard concrete. The incredibly bright flashbulbs of the local paparazzi erupted in a blinding, aggressive strobe light. This is a massive mistake, Derek wailed pathetically, looking frantically over his shivering shoulder at me. Natalie, tell them, please tell them it is a terrible mistake. I calmly walked down the gangway, ignoring his desperate cries. I confidently handed Agent Miller the heavy, waterproof bag. The unencrypted hard drive is safely in there, Agent Miller, I said clearly, my firm voice carrying effortlessly over the snapping of camera shutters, along with 3 physical financial ledgers. I believe authorities will be exceptionally interested in the offshore accounts detailed in Folder 4. Thank you, Miss Hayes. Your cooperation has blown this case wide open, Agent Miller replied, securing the evidence bag. As Derek was brutally handcuffed and violently dragged into the dark back of a heavily armored police transport van, Madison tried to make her final, pathetic move. Sensing the circling cameras, she threw herself to the wet ground, sobbing. "I am a victim," she shrieked to a hungry reporter who had pushed his way to the front of the barricade. "Derek Harrison brutally manipulated me. He held me strictly hostage on that sinking boat. I had absolutely no idea about his horrible corporate crimes." I completely stopped walking. I slowly turned around and looked directly at Madison, who was currently putting on an incredible, desperate performance for the international press. I pulled out my smartphone, connected it to a loud Bluetooth speaker I had borrowed from a communication officer, and cranked the volume to maximum. I aggressively hit play. My voice echoed sharply across the incredibly crowded dock, instantly followed by Madison's sharp, undeniable, scheming tone. Yes, the ultrasound is totally fake. The incredibly crisp recording blasted loudly, easily cutting through the shocked murmurs of the gathered crowd. I literally paid a tech at a clinic in Miami $500 to print it with my name on it. Derek is a complete idiot. As soon as the massive ring is on my finger, I will just tell him I miscarried. I have him completely wrapped around my little finger. Total, absolute silence instantly fell over the massive pier. Every camera lens instantly pivoted from the dark police van directly to Madison. Her jaw unhinged. She stared at the speaker, then at me, her eyes wide with a profound terror that was truly beautiful to witness. "I already sent that audio file to every major global news outlet," I announced loudly, "including your mother, Madison, the one you were bragging to on the phone last night." She scrambled backward, covering her crying, miserable face as reporters descended upon her like starving wolves, shouting questions about her extortion plot and fake pregnancy. I did not stay to watch her drowning in the media frenzy. I had already watched her drown once. This time, I had a new life to start. 6 months later, the justice system delivered the final blows. I sat comfortably in the gorgeous mahogany-paneled upper gallery of the federal courthouse located in the Southern District of New York. Judge William Barrett slammed his heavy wooden gavel, the sound echoing loudly through the tense room. Derek Harrison was officially sentenced to 14 long years in federal prison, absolutely without the slight possibility of early parole. His proud family's massive company, Harrison Global Tech, was completely and totally liquidated by the government to finally pay off the countless defrauded investors. His wealthy father had publicly and viciously disowned him, hiring an elite crisis management team to desperately salvage whatever was left of the ruined family name, aggressively distancing themselves from his horrible rogue actions. Madison did not escape the blast radius. Investigators easily discovered she had actively helped Derek forge signatures on fraudulent contracts to secure her position. She was serving a long prison sentence in Florida, permanently blacklisted from the corporate world forever. As bailiffs moved to escort Derek out, he stopped. He looked back at the gallery, making eye contact with me. He mouthed the word sorry. I felt absolute indifference. I stood, smoothed my tailored suit, and confidently walked into the bright sunlight of Manhattan. The ocean tried to end me, but it totally failed. Now, my completely new story actually starts right here, right now. I am finally free and truly alive. If you loved this story of rebirth and revenge, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell, so you never miss another dramatic tale of karma catching up to those who deserve it. Have you ever experienced a shocking betrayal? Drop your story in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more thrilling, real-life inspired content right to your screen. See you next time.